some days.
Oh my gosh.
So, anyway, Patrick, are we ready? We are live. Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for coming out. For once, I can say not on a hot, but on a cold and possibly rainy night. Thank you, virtual audience, for joining us. And it's really nice to have John back in the store. It's been a while.
Thank you. It's been, I'm not sure if this is true, but I think I might have been the last event before COVID closed everything down. There were 3 writers here, and there was news of a pesky virus, and people stopped coming here, and there was maybe one person in the audience who wasn't related to me. So
Were you on your way to the Left Coast Crime?
I was. That got canceled.
Okay, there was a convention in California and they didn't cancel it, even though they knew they were going to have to cancel it, because until the state canceled it, they would have had to pay the hotel and all the penalties. But if they which was really hard on the writers who still, without knowing, showed up. And then discovered it was canceled. But anyway, we had lots of writers moving through here, as one might, and you were probably one of them.
Yeah, and all the writers were so concerned about COVID, they all went to the bar. And there were like 50 people in there, happy that the thing was over, but we could drink.
Place, right? I know. If you drank enough and smeared it all over your face, it was probably safe with the alcohol. So I think I remember that you were here for your first book, right?
I was here with Kent Kruger.
That's right.
We had a great night. I've gotten to know Kent better. He's such an awesome person.
He is.
And a great writer. So we've gotten to know him at different things and sat across from him and his wife, and really good guys. So that was my first night of my first book, first ever event. So it's really cool to come back here.
Well, we're delighted to have you. Actually, doing your first ever event with Kent Kruger is not a bad idea.
Yeah.
He's a real magnet and a super nice guy. Very helpful. So that was for The Good Detective, right?
Absolutely.
Which did really well. It was nominated for various awards, sold really well.
Yeah, it was a finalist for the Edgar for best first novel. So
right.
I was going to butcher that. The minute the camera turns on, I'm going to make a million mistakes. I know.
Just ignore it.
Yeah. So, the first 2 books were both in the New York Times, like 4 times among the 2 of them. So, but I wrote 3 books in that series, and then my editor said, like, hey, to grow yourself as a writer, you should pause and try to write something different. And, years went by, and that's what Head Cases is.
Okay. So that took you a while to conceive of Head Cases. Why did it take so long?
So I actually started writing 3 books all at once. Head Cases was one of them. There's sort of a mixed genre, like a psychological horror mixed with a police procedural. And then there's a family story. So I started sort of hopping back and forth between each of them. And I feel like the minute I sort of got the main character right on this one sort of emerged.
Sorry, I shouldn't have drunk the water.
Yeah.
It was the Kool-Aid, just plain colored.
Yeah. There was a gap in time for sure. But the good news is I have like 300 pages done of one book and another 200 of another book that I'm just getting back to now.
Well, that's really good news for you. Nothing is ever wasted.
Yeah.
Right. No. So your character, there's been a number of people recently and also in the past, like T. Jefferson Parker, who decided to give their sleuth some sort of neurological or neurodivergent thing. T. Jeff gave somebody synesthesia, for example,
right.
Which I thought was really fascinating. So what does your character here, Camden, have?
It's interesting. This question comes up a lot since I've gotten it out. Advanced people are reading it about like, hey, you have a neurodivergent main character. I really started just by thinking about, when I started the characterization, I started thinking about just people who are a little different in the world and how hard it is for people who think differently just to move throughout our world and navigate things. And I was looking at a form of that originally for the antagonist and for the protagonist. And it wouldn't be interesting if I could sort of mix 2 people like that. So when I started shaping Gardner, I also started shaping the character of his mom.
Okay.
So it really started with, it's an issue that I'm neurodivergence is an issue that I care about like deeply as a human, and interacted with people who think very differently. And I think that, for a number of them, they have to, like I said, they have to navigate through the world in a different way. And I started thinking about a character of a mom who didn't sort of like labels and wanted to help her son by giving him these tools and coping techniques. So it really started like as a mother-son thing, which I had never seen sort of be at the core of some police procedural. So in the book, the mom is an echo. You constantly hear him thinking like what his mom told him how to deal with things like this.
So, what kind of neurodivergence does he have? Because there's various kinds.
So as stated, it's not stated in the book, partly because I didn't want to put a label on it.
Okay.
And also, so all that's stated in the book is he has an extremely low affect. And his mom did not believe in having him tested or labeled or whatnot. So
Okay, but additionally, you've called him a savant. So, does that mean he has like a super high IQ?
he has a super high IQ. He has a super high memory. He has like an eidetic memory. So he has certain characteristics, but at the same time, he doesn't know how to interact with people in a way that would be like neurotypical. So, you see a lot of this through the other characters, and I wanted to build an ensemble also. That was one of the goals in my other books. I had, two partners that were detectives. When I set out to do this, I wanted to build an ensemble, and I wanted to build an ensemble that to me looked like people I see today. So one of the things was to build this group that really supports each other. So at the core of Head Cases, the origin story is, I should back up and say, like the overall book brings you inside a unit called PAR, which stands for Patterns and Recognition. And they are a group within the FBI that is there to solve puzzles and riddles that have confounded other parts of law enforcement that have been sent to the FBI that nobody can solve within the FBI. And the origin story of that is that there was an agent named Frank Roberts who put together this unit by going around different field offices and picking people out who didn't exactly fit in, who were very bright, and forming this unit. So, but they are not to sort of travel. They're not to interact with the general public. So right when the book starts, of course, they are sent out to travel, and they are sent out to interact with the general public. So you get to see the group sort of dealing with themselves and being on the road.
I like that. I mean, it's almost like a black ops group, which military thrillers have a lot of, partly because to go through the normal chain of command would not allow them to do all the off the book stuff they want to do. This is my advanced reading copy, which is why I was opening up. The publisher helpfully put down a little bio and a little list of the main characters for PAR. So the idea being that it would make it easier for me to read it. Anyway, and the little descriptions, there's the ace, the boss, the analyst, the shooter, and the rookie. So the shooter's kind of an interesting character to have in a law enforcement organization. It does not mean photography.
Yeah, her nickname is Shooter in the book, and you find out why she's called this. She's called this. Each of these people have sort of made some mistake that sort of landed them in some outpost office of the FBI. And I don't know. I don't want to spoil the mistake that's in the book. You can read the book and find out. But based on this, she was sort of kicked out of ATF, and she was sort of moved into a different position within the FBI. And she is sort of rescued, but her backstory is that she actually was an Olympic athlete that was in the London Olympics as a shooting athlete, and now is part of this group. So she is sort of their weapons expert. So and there's someone who's sort of a mathematician and an analyst. There's a new person who comes in that you don't really know why they got there. They got there a very non-traditional way. They didn't screw up, basically. And then there's some characters that you don't learn in the book. What is their backstory? Like, how did they end up there? It's sort of hinted at, but it's not told. And, maybe you'll buy the next book, and maybe I'll tell it in the next book, or maybe I'll string you along for a third book. No, some of that you leave room for to come up with a great idea in another book.
Well, that's very true. And if you have a team like that, you have a choice between keeping them together and losing one or two and bringing in new people. And actually, in almost all law enforcement books that I have read, there's internal conflict. It's either up the chain of command or it's among the group itself. Think about Bosch, who's forever, at war with people at the LAPD.
Yeah, and there's some of that in this book where you don't know if the group is going to stay together or not, and they almost don't want to ask like what they did wrong or why, and they're obviously being sent on the road. There's information. So when the book opens, this is not to spoil anything more than the first couple of pages. When the book opens, Gardner Camden, who is the main character, he is sent to a house in Texas because there's a body there that they fingerprinted a guy, and the body is someone he declared dead 7 years earlier. So he is sort of sent over there with his partner Cassie to see, does this make sense? Is this the same person? And immediately a second body is discovered within a day of that, and they are sort of sent on the road after this serial killer. And these guys who they declare dead are themselves people who've committed multiple crimes. So there's sort of they are chasing some sort of serial killer who's killing other killers, but some of the information is information that was held back by the FBI. So they start to wonder whether they're being set up. Why are they being sent out on the road at all? And is there someone within law enforcement who's involved?
You mean, is there a leak?
Yeah, is there a leak? Exactly.
Is there a leak? That's the technical term.
So.
A leak, right. So you've got the description on the... He wrote this book a long time ago, and I read it 3 months ago, so you have to forgive me if I picked it for our crime book of the month, and I really liked it, but now I'm having a little trouble remembering names and all. So we have 2 different serial killers in different decades and different states. Do you find that having a cold case as well as a current case makes an interesting plot idea?
Yeah, I did, because I was looking at a bunch of... first, to step back, I had to do a lot of research about the FBI, and you start researching past crimes going back 20, 30 years. And it's really interesting to have a structure where, to have a killer killing killers, you have to know what the original killer did. And so it allows you to develop sort of a case inside a case. And this book is about a group of people whose main job is to solve riddles. So you sort of develop your own sense of sort of like a nesting doll of riddles, and if you have an old case and a new case, it sort of has that function.
There is I don't know if any of you read what's his name? Strike. What's his first name? Connor? It's not Connor. It'll come to me. Starts with a C. C Strike. Let's go with that. And he's a very interesting character. And if you have a chance, not the brand new one, it's just dropped episode 1, but the one before there's a serial killer, and there's all kinds of things, something similar to what you're talking about. But what's really terrifying about the story is the completely banal face of evil that you come up at the end. So, you can sometimes think that serial killers, guys like that, are psychopaths, and they obviously have some of that quality, but they're not necessarily devils. They're not. Some of them, particularly in this case, is the last person you would think. And so I found that fascinating, to look at somebody so ordinary, whose motive was so ordinary, and who killed a lot of people.
Yeah, it was the other day on Instagram, some of the people who were posting for publication day yesterday, they pulled different quotes from the book, and one of them pulled a quote of Gardner's mom talking to Gardner in the book, and saying, like, a serial killer is just a regular person, and it's your job to understand, the madness inside the maniac, and to pull that out of him, and understand that if you try to make him into something more than he is, right, you're creating an enemy in your own mind. So, and his mom was a forensic psychologist. That sort of was her career during most of it. We meet her when she's older. She had him as not as a very young woman, so she's older at the time, and you're sort of hearing her voice in echoes and hearing it in instructions, to him. But I think it's interesting. I tried to, as you go to these different writer things and conventions. Sometimes they're craft things, and I'll be on a panel, someone else will be on a panel. You try to sit there and learn something and better your craft every book. And I was talking afterwards with one of the other writers who is a friend of mine, and we got into the topic of antagonists and how they feel a little flat, a little cardboard in some books. And either myself or the other writer said, well, what we should really do is like just write the book completely from the point of view like the antagonist is the hero of his own book. And if we can do that, then we'll develop a way more fleshed out book. So about 2/3 the way through writing this, I actually stopped and started mapping out what does the antagonist think? Like he's the real hero, and tried to develop him as like he is the protagonist. And you have the story backwards. It's his story. He has a reason he's doing everything. He's very logical, and he has emotions involved. And in his mind, he's a good person. He's doing something righteous. And I think the end effect was that it feels like very fleshed out with his motives.
Well, I think another thing too that makes a book really distinguished is that if you are able to mourn the victim, too often the people who are killed in books are there just to be killed. And well, no, somebody once said to me that the very best crime novels are one where you mourn the victim and have some empathy with the killer. Or the antagonist. And I think that's true. I think that both of those things give an emotional resonance to a story.
Yeah, for sure. In my first book, in The Good Detective, I have interstitial chapters told from the point of view of the boy who's the victim of the crime. And I got a lot of really good feedback on that it didn't make him a throwaway person. Like
Right.
he was a real person who went through this, and he suffered, and he gets to tell his story. And I think there's a lot of that lives in this book, because you have to sort of uncover these other crimes that have happened at past times. It also starts with, you think Gardner is this perfect person who makes no mistakes, and right away on page 1, he's being sent to a crime scene where he declared someone dead who in fact just died yesterday, and which means he made a mistake 7 years ago, and there's someone else who was killed, and that was a cover-up. And right away you put him in this situation that's precarious for him as a person who thinks there's no exceptions, it's all black and white.
Right. And the world actually isn't.
Yeah.
Right. So you've mentioned in more than one place in the arc and your conversation that he has an eidetic memory. What do you mean by that?
He can remember conversations word for word. He can remember pictures detail by detail.
Okay. I mean, I have an eidetic memory, so I was interested that you do that. But mine is almost entirely related to the written word.
I'm not surprised with the amount of books you
I
read.
know, it drives people crazy, but it's like being born with perfect pitch or something. Either, it isn't like it's anything meritorious on my part. My mother was like that. So, I think of eidetic as, I mean, I can remember the words on a page. So if I'm over here on page 76 and something sounds weird, I can think, it wasn't like that on page 22 or something, and, go right back. That's why I can't read a digital book, because there is no, digital book is basically just a scroll like a fax machine. So it does me no. I drive publishers mad because they all want to save money by having me get a digital arc, and I have no, I don't care. Print out the galley, do whatever you want. It's just the way my mind works.
Well, when I was here for my second book, you said, hey, you don't know this, but there's a book written in like 1971 that has a plot very similar to this. I remember you saying, and I was like, all right, I was one.
Well,
I have never heard of this author.
That's true.
So.
No, sorry, that wasn't intended as a put down even back then. I had a conversation earlier today because I did a virtual event at 5:00 with Fiona Davis, who was sort of mourning the fact that she was turning 60 and much of her life had turned into history. And I said, "Wait till you get to be 84, and you will discover that things that you remember that were an ordinary part of your life, very few people can relate to anymore." So the fact I remembered the old book was just because I read it. It wasn't like, I went out and looked for it.
It was funny. I was like, all right, I've got it. And I still haven't checked out that book, but I'm moving on.
Right. Well, it makes me a good bookseller. So there we are. Right. So you mentioned that you were working on other things, and this one turned out to be the winner. Was that your choice, or was that your agent, editor, whoever it was that made that call?
It was my choice. The minute sort of the characters, I think, of Cassie and Shooter started like getting clear, I had the other characters down. I had Gardner down, but I didn't have the two ladies on the team. Cassie is sort of has a very particular way of speaking in the book. She speaks like a 19, 20-year-old, and I have a 19 and a 21-year-old. So, and I love when I, like right away, some advanced reader put up a review that said, 4 to 5 stars. I would have given this 5 stars, except there's a character that talks like my annoying daughter. And I was like, yes, success. So Cassie is that way. Shooter's a real smartass the entire time. So the minute I sort of got their two personalities down, I felt like this book sort of emerged. And then it's just, I think I hit that point where the book was sold, and they told me right away, like, you probably missed July 1st. And at my publisher, I think they were like July or August was the deadline. They didn't want to get into the election cycle. They didn't want to be selling books during the election cycles. They were like, if you miss July or late July or mid-July, we're going to bump you all the way to January. So
yeah, most publishers did that, which made life really hard here at the Poison Pen.
I'm sure.
We had 2 or 3 months where we had to sort of manufacture books in order to have something to sell. I don't disagree with that decision. In fact, I thought seriously about just closing the store for a while there, but you can't stop deliveries and you can't stop all the stuff that makes a business run.
So the book was done. A certain time before that. So they had a lot of time to edit. So I was moving on, and the funny thing is, I was already sort of moving on to this other book while it was out being sold, and my agent's like, there's an editorial person at my agency, and I had sent her one of the other books, and my agent said, well, I hear Genevieve has like your next book, thinking like the next one in this series. I was like, oh, she has a book, but it's not the next one there. And he was like, what are we doing? I was like, I didn't want to presume you could sell this book. He's like, oh yeah, we're going to sell this series. So put that on hold. So that went on hold again. So the sequel to Head Cases is with my editor right now. Okay. So that delivered in like November, December. So I'm getting notes any day, hopefully, on that, and I'll get back onto that. So I've paused everything, wrote the next book in this series. And then I don't know if I mentioned during this whole time, was one day the book became like, I got a call from my agent and they said, you have the hottest book in Hollywood. And so there's a bidding war, and then that got sold to HBO. So
wonderful.
So it's in development right now. They're writing the pilot. They've had a showrunner, then they got rid of that showrunner, and then there's a new showrunner. And I've met those two guys. They're great, and they wrote an outline, and they're writing a pilot now. So hopefully, you never know what's going to happen in Hollywood. It could die tomorrow, but that's just how it goes.
But meantime, they pay you option money, which is not a bad thing.
Yes, exactly. So that was nice. That's already been invested. And part of it was used. We have 2 kids in college, so that gets used right away.
One of the weird things they do is they actually will bring a show all the way up to the time when they can send it out, and then decide that it will make more money by saving taxes if they just throw it away. And I have not yet worked out Hollywood economics. I find it completely baffling. And I would think it would be heartbreaking if you were that person, and that whole thing, the actors and everybody else had made a show only to watch it get the boot.
Yeah, there's you go after the writing conventions, you go to a dinner. Usually a bookseller who's in whatever town will take a bunch of writers to dinner, and you'll say, oh, I got option. And then there's like 8 old guys like, yeah, I've been optioned too. I've been optioned. There was one guy who's like, I've been optioned 20 times, and I hope they keep optioning it. Like, I'll make more money off the option than I will off that. He's like, I send my kids through college and all the option money. He's like, they keep optioning. I was like, oh, I really wanted to go, But Max they seem very, the 2 production companies are involved. They seem super on it. They're like, really want it to happen. And the writers are great writers. So I'm excited. They're going to do something completely different. They pitched me their pilot, which I won't give up, what they do with this book in the pilot, but they pitched it. I love the idea. So they're getting after it.
Well, let's hope for the best.
Yeah.
So talk to me a little bit about your career in advertising as sort of and I think about Clive Cussler, who, was in advertising. Any of you remember the commercial for Ajax foaming cleanser? Right? Floats the dirt right down. That was Clive. Every time I saw Clive, that would go through my head. Ajax, the foaming cleanser, floats the dirt right down the drain. But anyway, and Dorothy Sayers, another great writer, was in advertising. So, what training or what bonus does working in advertising give to you as a writer of fiction?
Well, the best training is there's two things. One is revising stuff. So if you're in advertising, you better be ready to revise. We have some in the audience who works in marketing, right? A lot of revisions. So we work on things. We also pass writing off, so you get used to not owning your writing. Like we have a writing team with 4 writers on it, and we all share work. So if you're not available, somebody else jumps on your job. So it gives you like you don't show up in your editor and your editor wants to change something and you're super precious about it. I'm used to having someone edit my work, have someone else pick up my work, or picking up someone else's work and seeing like, oh, this is the problem, I can solve this, or they can solve the problem that I've created. So I think it's really good for that. I also think you have to tell a story in a really brief time. You have to tell a story in 15 seconds, in 30 seconds. It's hard to tell a story in 30 seconds. If it's a print ad, you have to tell a story in 8 words. It's hard to tell a story in 8 words or 2 words or a 1-word tagline. So it teaches you how to like compress your thinking, and I think that's really good. I think as my writing has gotten better in advertising, my writing in fiction has gotten better.
All right. Well, it's handy also to have a salary while you're
Yes.
not writing books for a while. So that worked out to your advantage as well.
Yeah, I love my job in advertising. There's a lot of people who are like they're trying to sell enough books to get out of their job. I love going into work and I love writing. It's a lot.
It's not Mad Men though anymore, is it? Or is it?
It's not Mad Men anymore. Nope. That era
Nobody
is over.
smokes, hopefully.
Nobody's smoking.
Right.
Yeah.
I know.
Somebody
That
are
turned
like-
me off, Mad Men. I tell you, I just couldn't watch it after a while because they smoked. Everyone was smoking the whole time.
Some people are quietly e-cigging on calls. It's like Mad Men that way.
It
Without
is,
the smoke.
Well, I would think there'd be, like a lot of energy and stuff.
There is.
and
It's
so you'd
a
have
really chaotic.
Right.
The life of sort of the life of pitching something is really exciting and really chaotic and really stressful. And then if you win it, you have to figure out how to actually do the work, because that means you have to hire people that don't work there, because the people that are doing the pitch are already working on something else. So it's kind of its own organism. It has to like grow, and then a lot on the client side. There's a very short life of the chief marketing officer. So like it's getting better now, but a couple years ago it was like 15 months long. I'm looking to you, Elisa, in the audience. 15 months average life, 18 months. People are getting fired, and when they get fired, then they say, I want to bring in my own agency, and then you lose your account and somebody else picks it up, and this is happening to you in a bad way, and then you're picking up someone else's account when they get fired. So it's a pretty chaotic world. It's exciting. It's definitely like feels like triage a lot of days, and if you're into like that, like if you like the stress of it, like if you're into that, then awesome.
You can be an adrenaline junkie.
Yes,
all
exactly.
You want. Right. I've decided that C-suite things are all a Game of Thrones. I mean, we call it that. George Martin brought that to us. But I mean, you see it in publishing all the time. Somebody lets go and then they bring a new person, and then all the good people that were working there get booted because the new person wants only people loyal to them, sort of like Henry VIII or whatever it is, But I'm sure that it spreads out.
Yeah, there's a downstream effect of that
You
to
bet.
us, and and then you're always trying to make yourself irreplaceable. I've got a client that I've worked on for 18 years, I think 17, 18 years, and it's super rare. Like normally you're working on a client for like 3 or 4 years, and then
Right.
it's either your choice or their choice. It's over. But if you can build a relationship and you start to know some of their ways better than they know them, because they've got their own people coming in every 2 years. But it's great if you can make it last.
Well, I brought it up because we've already seen my advanced reading copy with this little team here. If there's any change, like up at the top in the FBI, then we may start a sort of Game of Thrones, even for something like well, we're seeing in real life a Game of Thrones at the FBI currently. So it wouldn't be surprising if it were in fiction.
Yeah, and there's a character, Polton, who's in the book, who is the head of he's in this book the number 2 at the FBI, and very ambitious, and he and the head of the FBI have to interact with the team, and it's really fun to have Gardner and Frank, who runs PAR, show up and see their different styles on how to deal with them, and because they think they're sort of you can romanticize it, but the word head cases is not a compliment. That's what the people inside the FBI call this unit as a derogatory term, that they're a bunch of head cases. So, and they overhear it and know that they're called that, but sort of ignore it.
In most books where there's some sort of organization and chain of command, mostly the people at the top are assholes, and and I mean, that's part of, because let's face it, these thrillers are built on conflict, and the more places you can introduce conflict into the story, the better. So one way to do it is to have internal conflict within the organization. Then you have external conflict, with people that you're chasing. And I mean, you can have a bad marriage or a good marriage, right, or a love affair. There's so many ways that you can bring, different sets of conflicts into the story.
Yeah, and Gardner's style is just, if he thinks it's you that's the leak, he just says it right to your face, because he has no other operating system. Whereas his boss, Frank, is like the smoothest guy at the FBI. So that conflict of them showing up in DC and trying to navigate that conversation is super fun for me as a writer. It's super fun to like build characters like this. I mean, that's why the book starts the way the book starts. Like, my goal is to like build a character and then say, what situation do I drop them in that's the worst possible thing for them? Like, what is their, like, so for Gardner, who thinks like everything is black and white and he does things perfectly, I drop him on page 1 into something where he made a mistake and he has no idea, because then it reveals character. So if you can put someone, it's the same with all of us. If you drop someone into like a not so great day, you find out a lot about them. You don't find out much dropping them into their best day. So
that's really very true. So one of the things you're going to have to keep in mind is your FBI that you're writing may diverge sharply from the FBI that's actually in play, the real FBI.
Yeah.
And that's hard for a lot of thriller writers. I was thinking, I won't name them, but 2 or 3 who try to write their books like right to the minute, and then real life events derail them, and then sometimes their books are late, or it causes a lot of agony because last minute rewrite or something of the sort. So if you're writing about any actual institution and it changes, then you've got your own version of it, but it may not track with the real version.
Absolutely. And these things have to live for years and years. And
do you know, it was a great tip somebody gave me years ago. He was writing a sports mystery. I think it was about golf. Anyway, and he said to me, there was a purse. They were all, there was going to be prize money, right? Because that's how it works in commercial sports. And he said, I learned years ago, never give it a monetary value, because that's the thing that is going to date this book the most. And, I think that's so true. You have to be sort of careful with money, because what seems like a lot 20 years ago seems like, like pocket change today or something. And,
absolutely. Someone discovers that writer and loves them 20 years later, like, I'm going to read all their books. And it's like, wow, it's $10,000. On the flip side, you read about real crimes and people kill people for very little amounts of money, and
or
that's
sometimes
a reality.
No money at all, right?
Yeah.
No, I know. There's lots of other motives. All I'm saying is that I think that your FBI is going to have to be your FBI. It can't be faithful to the institution 100%.
Absolutely, and I'll tell you, in the sequel to this, there's some stuff about what makes a gun, and that law has been changing radically in the last 2 years. Mm. So you do get hit with like a surge of paranoia if you put out like if you put a Google alert on certain words, and then the news hits and it's like, okay, a receiver that's this percentage built is considered a gun. So anyone who makes that is a gun manufacturer. So they have to put a serial number on that, and they're forcing people to either raise their hand and say, I am making guns, or I am not making guns, so that they can track all the guns in this country. Since there are a lot more guns than people, and it's pretty hard to track guns. So that law has been changing throughout 2020. It's being clarified between the Biden administration and the ATF. They keep putting out notices like, okay, this is what it is now. And then Biden will weigh in and say, we agree with that, because the president has to weigh in and say, we agree with that. And who knows what will happen in 2025. And
we have remained.
I just hope I get to like due date of the book before that changes.
You should, right? We as an institution here have remained religiously apolitical. So we're staying that way.
Yeah.
We're just watching it unfold. It's
Mhm.
almost like a thriller in real life, you know. So it is a thriller in real life, not necessarily a good one. Right. I want to be a survivor. But then again, at 84, I have perspective. What can really hurt me at this stage? Not a lot. So, questions from the audience, right? We probably covered a whole range of topics. Anything you guys would like to ask? They're paralyzed.
In doing your research with the FBI, did you feel that they were pretty accepting of your wanting to know how things worked, or did you go to them, or was it purely online where you did your research?
You- Oh, absolutely. The question was about doing research, and do you go to the FBI, and how do you keep that true, right? Yeah, I do a little bit of both. So in my third book, in my other series, I actually had someone write in who was the head of the GBI at the time, which is the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, and that's sort of the state equivalent of the FBI. And I have the other series is set in northern Georgia, and just talking about how on my procedure was, and sort of developed an email relationship. And he's left that role since, but he actually read an early copy of this, and I said, like, hey, point out anything I've got wrong. So you do go to first person sources like that if you've got them, and then you also do a lot of reading. There's a lot of stuff available. It's just not it's not exciting to do research a lot of times, and you can't have the research take over the book, because then it'll be a nonfiction book and it won't be as thrilling. And you have to take artistic liberties because it won't be as thrilling if you don't. And you have to sort of walk that line. But there's a lot. Yeah, you can find the new agent training manual. It's 300 pages, and you can read it. And from a particular year, a couple years ago, or someone will give it to you. If you ask some people, they will say, I'll get you a manual, and they like quietly give you a manual, and then you have that. But then you have to sit there and read a 400-page manual. And then the FBI puts out a lot of actual notices. They're pretty deliberate in what their goals are. And their goals, like you're saying, Barbara, shift, as time goes by, they're more concerned in the last decade about, what they call CSAM, child sex abuse material. That was not a thing 15 years ago, but now it's such a problem in society that becomes the province of the FBI to go after. They're, crimes that involve, cross state lines and involve money and money transfers and money for terrorism. These things shift every decade with different administrations, different priorities, but you have to do a lot of reading. And then sometimes you do a lot and it amounts to a sentence. Like I think it was my second book. I did all this research on how a scrap metal yard will compact a car. And, I bring it in. I have a workshop I attend. I bring that in, and it's like 3 pages. And they're like, oh my God, nobody wants to hear about this. So it's a page, and then your editor gets a hold of it. And at the end of the day, it's like 2 sentences. You're like, oh my God, now I know how scrapyard works. And how do I get rid of that? How do I download that? I don't need that ever again. So you do a lot of work, and sometimes it's 2 sentences.
Very often, I've heard authors say that people in professions really like having someone ask them about how it works. It's kind of fun to have somebody curious about it and get to talk about it.
Yeah,
So-
absolutely. I think even if it's that one sense, it adds a credibility. Your character knows that information, and knowing it, they act different. So I think you got to do the work. It's just, we're all storytellers, we're all writers, but then, someone's a professional writer because they do all that work that you don't want to do. You just want to pick up the book and enjoy it. I was just telling my friend Chad, I read a spy novel. I never read spy novels, but I'm on a panel and I read one and it was amazing. And I was like, wow, so I had to research the guy afterwards. He worked at the CIA. So you have some people that are like, they're writing books about an industry they work in, and you have people that are not. You just have to put in the work, to get it right.
Taylor or John, was it? Which one?
What's that?
Was it Taylor or was it David?
It was Dave McCloskey. Yeah.
I had them here together. And
Oh,
it
you
was,
did?
yeah, it was really fun to.
I know Brad. I was on a panel with Brad like a couple of years ago. He's awesome too.
He was, you mean Brad Taylor?
Yeah.
Yeah, he wasn't in the, he was Delta Force.
He was, special
He was
forces,
Delta Force and Special Forces, right, which is different. Right. Right. Anybody else?
Were you going to ask if I was special forces? This body?
Well, I can say the same thing.
Yeah.
My question was, which spy did you read,
Oh, yeah, it was the seventh
Right.
floor.
Right.
It was great.
Yeah, he's a wonderful writer. They're great spy novelists sort of just swim up out of the ether every once in a while.
Yeah.
It's a much smaller genre, and there's some really great people, but like all of a sudden somebody comes along and we all go, oh, it's the next John le Carre or whatever it is. It is a more smaller field. So I'll tell you my favorite FBI story, which has actually nothing to do with the FBI, but I think it's wonderful. Sue Grafton, always had these kind of obvious titles like A is for alibi and, M is for murder, whatever it is. So she loved talking about things she'd done wrong. She loved telling stories about herself. And she started in on a book, K is for kidnapping. She was working along. She was probably at 180 pages now. Kinsey Milhone's a private eye working in a fictional Santa Barbara, California. And one day she read something in the newspaper and went, oh shit, it's an FBI case because kidnapping is an FBI case. And so she had to throw it away and start all over again with K is for killer. And I think that illustrated the fact that jurisdiction is an important thing. If you're writing law enforcement, you can't, Scottsdale police don't do well in Glendale if there's some crime or hit and run or something going on. And the FBI has national jurisdiction. The Marshal Service does. John Sanford has brought that to our attention because he switched Lucas Davenport from Minnesota and being in the police force. He made him a U.S. Marshal so he could go all over. The CIA is the external, although they get into other things. And, so if you're writing that, I think it's important that, you've got mobility with the FBI. You can send them all over the country, whereas your North Georgia guys are pretty much limited to North Georgia.
And just their area of North Georgia.
Yeah.
So they're just in their town. And, but that gives you the chance to make that town as awesome as you want, as dangerous as you want. I felt like for a small town, a lot of people were not doing well. A lot of people are perishing in that town at some point. That wasn't why I stopped writing it. I took a pause on that. But yeah, this book, they're all over the country. You know, they're in Texas, they're in California, they're in New Mexico, they're in Florida. So they're sort of running all over the country, which is a lot of fun. But after, once this becomes like a series, then I had to do a lot of work heading into the next book. Like, okay, what is within their jurisdiction? Like, and you can just, there's FBI bulletins. Like you can, if you want to wander from office to office, and there are 56 field offices in the United States, there are bulletins on every office's website of what they're investigating, what they closed. And, you look around to try to understand that best and, see what's out there. Where can this team go? What are the sorts of problems? And when they do the TV series, they're going to do like a 15 episode. And they're going to be doing the overall arc of this book from what I understand, but they're also going to just check out what other crimes this exact team would be solving. So yeah, they'll have that same challenge as like what's within the province of the FBI.
Sounds great. Anybody have a final question? Yes, ma'am.
Have you ever invented a character that you turn out not liking?
That's a really good question.
Well, sometimes I don't like to like them, but I like them. I love antagonists. I love great antagonists. So there are people that I know you're supposed to, as the reader, dislike. And if I'm doing that job, like the first people reading my book, can I curse or not on this, Barbara? Okay.
I already have. So
okay, great. Like my wife will read, like my wife and my son and my daughter will get the first copy. My father-in-law, if he's staying with us at the time, has gotten very early copies. And so my wife will say, this person's a dick. And
that's not a curse word. Come on.
Okay. I know I can do better, but I won't. And I'm like, okay, so that made the point of, what I want, but really what I want is her to think like he's a nuanced dick, like he has like he has his reasons for what he's doing. I think everyone is like, at some level, everyone is out for themselves as a character. Like, this book has a really great team element, and people, what people love about this book so far is the characters. Everyone loves these characters, and and my wife would say, I'm like, everyone loves this book. She's like, stop acting surprised that they love your book, but people really like the characters. That's what they love about them. And I think a lot of that is like adding depth to each person, but also adding like a personal motive, like what's their ambition, what's their desire. I don't know if I do that right. I don't dislike anyone, but I'm sort of that, like, I have a little bit of a low affect myself, so I'm not like Gardner, but I don't mind a lot of different types of people. So yeah.
Anyone else?
Do you have people in mind, like if they're taking that and going to make a series out of it, do you have people in your head would be like Gardner would be this actor?
So it was interesting. So the process of the bidding thing. So I didn't expect, this was like kind of a journey. This was kind of a journey to get this book out in a lot of ways. A couple of things. I seeked out a new agent, and my old agent was a fantastic woman and a fantastic representative and a good friend. But I think she agreed, like, oh, I need to be with someone else who's selling sort of work more often than I'm writing. So I found someone new. Got notes. That's what you get. You get notes from your agent and start working on the book, which is this book. And then the agent like sort of unceremoniously fired me. And I was sort of without an agent and sort of floating for a while. And then I found my way to Writer's House, which is a fantastic agency that I'm with right now. And there was an agent there who was new to the business and sort of getting his feet wet and didn't turn out to be an agent that could bring this out. So the president of the agency stepped in and took this out and sold it pretty quickly. And then they said, like, oh, we're going to bring this to Hollywood. But there was a writer's strike. So they said, if there's a second strike, you're just dead in the water. We're not doing anything. And then, I should say during this whole time, I go on a vacation, I flip on a boogie board and land on my head and compress my C5, C6. So I've had 4 cervical spine surgeries in the last 2 years. And so this is life. It's ups and downs, right? Happening at the same time. So this is all happening. I have to figure out how to write on a lot of pharmaceuticals. I have to figure out how to write a lot of pain. I have a board over my jacuzzi. Put my laptop on, and I am in like 105-degree water, and I'm clacking away at night because I have to like get some relief, but also write. So it's sort of a crazy 2-year period. And sometime during that, they said, oh, I got a call like, hey, you've got this book. And I got on with CAA, who's my representative in LA, and they brought it out and they said to me that same question. Do you have anyone in mind? I say, I have no clue. They say, can you take meetings? I say, sure, I'll do meetings. So when are they? They say, they start tomorrow. I say, oh, huh. I am going back to Auburn, Alabama to stay with my daughter in an Airbnb, and because she's there for sorority rush. So we're in
Much more important than a Hollywood meeting.
right. So we are an Airbnb that has Wi-Fi that cuts out every 4 hours, and I have 7 important meetings, maybe the most important meetings that year, to attend. And but the second strike has hit. But the book is so hot that they are like, now we're putting it out and just let the bidding begin, sort of thing. So I meet with each of these people. It's really exciting. It's really fun. A lot of smart, creative people who've read the book and who really want to bring this to life on TV. And, I got some advice that when someone asks me that question, I say, who do you think should play Gardner? And they say, who do you think should play Gardner? So we just had dinner before this, and my friend asked me, like, did they ask that same question? And I said, who was the person? What's the guy's name? Someone brought up Milo Ventimiglia as like someone, like, there were others. There was lots of people they would bring up, different ethnicities in the character, which I thought was really interesting. I think it caused me to visualize it completely differently, which was exciting too. So I would ask that question and they would throw out, and I'm horrible with Hollywood actors' names. I don't watch a ton of TV. So I will if Head Cases is on HBO Max, which I do subscribe to. So they would throw out a lot of names, but at the time there was this double strikes. They couldn't even talk to anyone. Like it was, and for me in the bidding process, a lot of the production companies had sort of a writer-producer partners, and the writer couldn't even attend that meeting because it would be a violation. So I met those people much later. So there was a lot of actors' names thrown out. It was sort of fun. It's sort of like playing dress up or something, to imagine it. But at the end of the day, I have no control. When they went to bring it out, they said, like, do you want to write this? And I said, no, I want someone who's a great professional at writing screenplays to write it. That's not who I am right now. Maybe in the future.
Boy, is that a different art. I did an event yesterday, publication day event for a big Hollywood guy. And he's got a new book out called Johnny Careless. Kevin Wade, his name is. And he's, I think, showrunner for 14 seasons of Blue Bloods and other stuff. Really great guy. And most of what we talked about is the difference between writing a screenplay, working in Hollywood, and writing his first novel, which he did during COVID because apparently he was in his kitchen one morning at 7 o'clock trying to make cornbread, and his wife came into the kitchen and said to him, "You need to find something to do," which I well related to. But, if you're interested in the differences, you should go and watch it on either our Facebook or YouTube because he's a real pro, and it was really fascinating. I think the two things that screenwriters bring to writing novels that really matter or distinguish them is A, they're good at dialogue, and B, they're really good at pacing. And as a C, they're not used to having to set the stage, so they don't do much in the way of description. And that's hard for them because then, as he said, I don't have people. So now I have to describe the room or, whatever it is, which he didn't have to do writing scripts.
Yeah, I think every writer has that spot they start from. Like some writers they start from voice, and some writers start from plot.
Right.
For me it's voice. So my dialogue comes more naturally for me. And then, there's writers. My favorite writer is James Lee Burke. He is voluminous in his exposition. He could talk about your sweater for 3 pages. And
often does.
Yeah, and I love his writing. It's not for everyone, but it's for me. And he's also a great dialogue writer too. He's just a great writer overall. But I think everyone starts from there, and then you're sort of building your craft in these other areas and trying to get stronger.
Indeed. Well, thank you all. I know it's hard to sit in these chairs for more than an hour. So at this point, I think, yes, thank you all very much for coming. Let's give John a round of applause and welcome him back. And if you would like to have him sign your book or take photos or something, probably works out better if you just say, "Here, I'll move the flowers," because you're kind of at photographing height.
Okay.
Is that okay? All right. Thanks very much, everybody. Have a safe drive home.